I would like to invite Dr. Diwakar Kumar Singh, sir, who is an assistant professor in Department of History at CM College, Darbhanga. Sir has done his MA in Ancient History from Jawaharlal Nehru University and Masters of Philosophy from University of Delhi, and he is currently pursuing PhD on Buddhist monastery and medicine. He has teaching experience of more than 12 years in various colleges of University of Delhi like Sri Venkateswara College, Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College, Shyamlal College and College of Vocational Studies. He has taught on subjects like early medieval India, history of modern Europe, rise of modern West and history of tourism. He has published and preserved many researched works and some important of them are Secured Identities and Sites, a study of Nalanda and its vicinity, exploring the topography of Shaivism in early medieval Bihar, ecological movement in North and South, which is a chapter written for BA program third year students for School of Open Learning, University of Delhi. His area of interest are archaeology of religion, Buddhist sites, and history of medicine in India. So now we are moving to the main part of this event. Now, on the behalf of the whole Shyamlal College Evening Fraternity, I would like to extend a humble request to you, sir, to grace us with your interactive and insightful talk. Sir, now the stage is all yours.
Uh, Thank you so much, Selinder, for this very generous introduction. And first of all, I'd like to thank this Sakshya Society for inviting me for this lecture. Uh, I hope my lecture will serve the purpose of this gathering. Uh, Firstly, when I was asked to choose the topic, even I was given this topic of relevance of ancient India in modern times. I was quite skeptic about this topic because it's a very voluminous, very huge, and massive in terms of underpinnings, and ancient India itself is a very huge one. Uh, Modern, ancient, medieval, modern, all this very artificial division which we have, very problematic division we have about Indian history, or this we have borrowed this from European notion of time. In fact, you know, if you look at this periodization problem, I think there are many ways in which this issue of periodization has become very problematic. For example, I would like to draw your attention, how the period or how the time period, emerges, sort of. So we have to go back to, the modern. I mean, when the British came to India, and they were, very obsessed. They were Their quests were looking at history, past of India's society, culture, political events, and all. And in course of doing so, they started looking at the text. Uh, they were quite disappointed at this moment that they were not finding one singular textbook of history. Uh, and they, concluded in a moment that, look, India had no India lacks the historical awareness, historical consciousness. So भारत के लोगों में ऐतिहासिक चेतना का अभाव है. That was how this sort of notion were formed, and but then this is a time when there's one man, William Jones, Sir William Jones. He has started looking at. He founded this Aesthetic Society of Bengal, and Aesthetic Society of Bengal was one institution which emerged as a major. It was largely based on the functioning of Royal Aesthetic Society, London. and it was a small gathering of people. They were discussing about India's past scientific discoveries and all, and they started publishing one journal. And so William Jones, with a very affluent background, I mean, he came to India. He was appointed a judge in Calcutta High Court, and then he was relying upon the Pandits and Maulvis in terms of giving judgment. So he was also very much he was truly polyglot. I mean, he learned many languages. He was well versed in Persian, Arabic, and many other languages. But he was not sort of aware about Sanskrit. Finally, he went to, he was assisted by one Pandit Radhakant. So, in his diaries, and he fondly remembered Radhakant, that one who assisted him in this in his long profession of being judge. But then, despite his huge reliability on Radhakant, he sometimes has doubts over his, interpretations. So he decided to learn Sanskrit. At that time, Sanskrit was something which was, very confined to a very small group of section of people. And he says that, Brahmins were very reluctant to teach him Sanskrit. Finally, he went to Nadia and then he learned Sanskrit. After learning Sanskrit, he has a very interesting observation about Sanskrit. And he says that, there's a very close affinity, close kinship between Sanskrit and the classical language of Europe, Latin and Greek. And says, it's a more scientific. No other language has this kind of scientificity and all. I mean, he has long, eology for Sanskrit as a language. But this is not something we should be very happy about, this statement or eology, which is coming from William Jones. Jones has the statement was not very plain. It has a very strong historical underpinnings. And then Colbrooks and others, indulge in all kinds of reading inscriptions, translating text. Basically, they wanted to have a law digest, so that they went to discover Manu Smriti, Yagvalka Smriti, and other law literature, various laws, books of India. Now, this is how this whole thing started. This was the time period when many discoveries came up. Now, James Prinsep, one who was first discovered the Asokan edict, one who deciphered the Asokan edict, Brahmi edict. And finally, it was established that Ashoka was the great ruler of India, one who ruled over a larger part of this continent. Now, all these histories, why these narratives are important? Because if you look at around 1813, a man named James Mill, who came to India, who actually wrote the history of India. And history of India he was a Benthamite. He was, utilitarian. That time, ideologically, utilitarianism was one of the, philosophical current of England, of Europe. And so he wrote the first text called History of India, and he divided the period into Hindu period, Muslim period, and British one. This is the first time the first textbook became available for the European, particularly the history kind of book. I mean, the singular text. Earlier there was, and they blatantly, he blatantly refused to accept any interpretations of the Orientalists like Jones and others. And this was new set of things which came up. Now it became the textbook for all the bureaucrats, all the administrators who were trained in Halle College in Oxford, and this is how this whole thing started. And then this first division of history into three phases, uh, you know, came up. Largely, if you look at the, right from the James Mill up to the, the writings of, during the even the nationalist writing and others, this tone continuously persisted, and people were looking at history into these divisions. Now, if you look at the genealogy of these divisions, how this is coming, you have to look back at the idea of enlightenment. And if you look at the idea of enlightenment, philosophy of enlightenment, then we come across this whole, the people like, uh, you know, people like Kant, people like Hegel, uh, Voltaire, and so many, whose idea was to find the universal regions. And this is how actually they were looking at the progressive form of, uh, you know, development. So for them, it was that medieval became the dark period, and the only history which they believed, in some ways, that it was history has to be seen in a very universal, homogeneous, and progressively in a totalizing way. This is how they actually formulated, and this is how the time periods were also constructed. Ancient, medieval, modern. There's one, and the boundaries were constructed: civilized, barbarians, white, black, and so many pejorative definitions were made. Pejorative connotations were, devised. For instance, how a continent can be a black, dark continent. Africa was designated as dark continent. Similarly, if you look at the medieval age, the whole medieval time was, perceived as, something very, what we call the dark age, and this, tendency continued to, exist among Europeans. Uh, Now, if you look at, you know, then the question is, should we avoid this chronological sequence of ancient, medieval, modern? Why the periodization is important, and how the, what is the purpose of, this periodization? Should we altogether, discard this idea of periodization? This is one question, because when we look at, ancient, medieval, modern construct, it suffers from huge historical problems and underpinnings. Now, Jacques Legoff has written a very interesting text. Legoff, of course, is he died. Of course, he's the very, renowned, very reputed historian, coming from Annales tradition. Annales is a one historical writing school in which immersed in France. And he said, and the book of, and his book is called "Must We Divide History into Period?" Question mark. This was published after his death. And the translation of this book was published after his death in 2015. Now, he says that he has questioned this whole construct of modern, and how this modern, modern time period is a very problematic. The notion of time itself is a very, there could not be a singular time. Jack Goody has termed theft of history. Jack Goody has very, interestingly devised this. He has the text called "Theft of History," where Goody says that, you're imposing the idea of, European ideas, Eurocentrism. So a region has to be, the time and space has to be very uniform. Look at the time, how it has been, formulated. Earlier, it was, they followed the Greek and Roman structure. After the Christianity, what we say that they started following before the Christ and after the Christ, and so on and so forth. So we have the GMT, Greenby's time. So time itself and temporality itself is a very subjective, though it has been imposed as a very uniform category. So this is something which is again a very problematic notions. 1979, 1978, this whole idea of representations, the question on representations emerged uh, in a very interesting way. And this was a text called Orientalism by Edward Said. Said's writing actually questioned the whole idea of representation, how the space were imagined, how the ethnicity were perceived, and how the identities were constructed. How the East, quote and quote East or Orient was constructed and reformulated. So the text received wide attentions, and it changed the course of in fact Syrian writing was largely borrowed, heavily borrowed from the idea, the two post structured argument of Foucault, and of course it has also borrowed from different various other disciplines, cultural studies and all, Gramsci, Foucault and others. So this whole idea of representation is something very important. We need to look at how temporalities has been constructed, how the time, how the notion of time itself is very much problematic. I mean, look at the modern historians, and then we also need to look at this whole modernity, and modern comes with the Renaissance, the event called Renaissance. Now, Renaissance itself has been questioned whether it has to be situated in 15th century or in 16th century or where. Now, this is hugely debated issues. One cannot go into the whole, but how the epistemic category of temporalities and how this time periodization has been constructed is very interesting. Now look at modern history writing. This has almost, even in recent past or in present context, either historians of South Asia or India have followed the same tradition of writing, though they have questions historical knowledge which were constructed by colonial authorities. But at the time period, we are almost using the same framework, ancient, medieval, modern. Now, recently, like people like Deepesh Chakrabarti and others have came up along with the new categories when they are focusing upon environmental history, Anthropocene, and other time period. The archaeologists, of course, have brought up new issues while addressing the question of time. For example, while addressing the question of landscape, particularly, I'm referring to one historian, one archaeologist, Kathleen Morrison, who has not followed, the linear, temporalities, and she rather goes with questioning the whole, conventional idea of time chronology, and she has she has relied more upon the Brodelian sense of time. Brodel, of course, is one historian representing the analysis school, who has used this longitudinals. A long term time has to be seen in a longer construct, a longer process. So Kathleen Morrison has, while studying the Daroji Valley, she has used that sort of construct. Now, the another thing which I want to go for is okay. So now I think I think one should start with a very basic premise, basic question of why the relevance of ancient India is a very larger question. Why ancient India is now? So first, my first premise of discussion was that we need to debunk the whole idea of this ancient, medieval, modern phraseology, which is quite problematic one. And we are not sure about where the rupture comes. Time exists in continuity, or history exists in a continuous process. Uh, there, there are many ways in which it's very subjective how we are choosing how we are locating the rupture of history. Now, the very basic question of uh, question is, what is history? I mean, what is and if you uh, explain this sort of things, probably we'll be able to reach out uh, the relevance of ancient India, or relevance of medieval India, or relevance of modern India. So there are there's a very interesting dialogue. Uh, you know, in fact, the question. Uh, Mark Bloch has written very interesting book called Historian's Craft, and he starts with uh, the statement, quoting her daughter, that one day his daughter asked him that, tell me what is the purpose of history, why we read history, and what is objective of history. Now, if you uh, look at uh, the answer of Mark Bloch, which he has given, and long through throughout the text, he has tried to situate this whole thing, that what is, history, what is purpose of studying history. So he says integrity with the truth, uh, you know, and he came up with many formulations, like, history must prove its legitimacy as a form of knowledge. Now, it's not only confined to that. I mean, he goes on a longer discussion of, and he cites examples. But again, he also has this trap when he compares that, only Christianity, has produced the whole consciousness of history has been in it has been existed in Christian traditions. So, on one hand, though Mark Bloch is trying to be very rational in his approach, another hand, his borrowing of examples are, totally based in the, Christian tradition. That how, in a way, he's also, trying to say that, well, Christianity has a long tradition of history writings and history. Uh, now, again, one. And there are many writers, like, obviously, Rankian history, which was based on, Ranke postulated that historians' job is to find out the truth. So, of course, one cannot, and Rankian history has been rejected all through. Like, people, those E.H. Carr or David Carr, and that many historians have rejected the idea of Rankian history. Positivists were obsessed with the fact that history has to be seen in a very scientific manner, and this is whole 20th century debate, that how history has to be seen, what should be the structure of history and all. Now, if you look at this Europeans historian, or European one, particularly when India was under the rule, under British rule, and this whole statement, whole idea that India lacks the historical consciousness, because they thought that the Greek and Romans had, and Indians were not having that. So, for example, right from the Hegel actually, relied upon James Mill's writing, and not only that, even Marx, who also somehow trying to say that Indian society is quite stagnant. It's not dynamic, so very closed society, no history, no change, and that kind of formulation were also based on. Though Marx was not historian, but then Marxian formulation was totally based on the company records and all. After Marx, it was Weber who also formulated in the same way. He says, Weber said, well, writing A Religion of India, he says that, well, Indian have produced, so many texts, for instance, ranging from the medicine to philology to, poetry and all kind of texts. But, unfortunately, Indians have not produced the sense of the history. So history as a knowledge were completely absent in Indian traditions. Uh, Now, I have a question, or in fact, this whole debate was later on refuted by many people have, particularly one scholar who refuted this whole thing was Robila Thapar. Before Robila Thapar, also Basum also tried to do that, but Robila Thapar has done that, and she says embedded history. Uh, Embedded history, she talks about embedded history. She talks about consciousness of past, uh, uh, and that could be found in mythology, that could be found in genealogy, and that could be found in the Kabbal tradition, Puranas, and all. And then also the creation, Puranas start with Puran. All Puranas start with the creation myth and all. So the notion of time is also very different. Now, if you look at the Greek and Roman traditions, they all start with mythology. They also have this mythological traditions. So it's not that the Greek and Romans and the Indians have a very if my myth has to be taken as a history, then Greek history is equally mythological than the Indian one. So I think there's no a very fundamental or radical difference between the Indian way of looking at past or the Greek way of. So saying that there were no Thucydides or the Herodotus or those kind of uh, historians in India, uh, in certain extent, it may be correct, but saying that the earlier notion of history writings were absent is completely wrong. You have the philosophy and the pramanas. Nyayas hold the Nyay canon text is based on the praman, and the praman is what the proof evidence. So there is whole a knowledge tradition which were produced. Now the one thing which uh, I would like to bring your I'd like to draw your attention. Look at how history, in fact, has emerged as a discipline, uh, in Europe. So, for instance, if you look at 16th century, history as a discipline entered into university, and mostly it entered into the German-speaking region. Of course, it was not Germany, I mean, Tuvalu and others, but German-speaking areas. Um, the first chair of ancient history, was established in Oxford, uh, and it was around 16th century. Uh, uh, in fact, and later on in 1622 and 1627 in Cambridge. So a chair was, and much later, in fact, modern history chair was formed. So this is about that. So far we have discussed two things. One was how chronology is sort of very problematic, ancient, medieval, modern. The second thing which I tried to uh, explain that how this whole idea of history writing from Orientalist John to James Mill and this whole uh, you know uh, uh, whole generation of historians, starting from the colonial one to the later, and that how people have trapped into this whole ancient, medieval, modern construct. And this is, uh, now, if you look at nationalist historiography, of course, nationalists tried to refute some of the colonialist, formalism of history. For example, many, for example, rationality regions, idea of democracy, idea of republicanism, and many other things were, successfully refuted. The idea of state, idea of taxations, all this. But nationalists gave more emphasis on killing the data from the sources, and they tried to refute colonialist writing. Uh, for example, if you look at the whole construct of classic period. Now, what is basis of saying the classic period or the classical civilization? Now, this, if you look at it, all this whole idea also comes or emanates from the uh, 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 Enlightenment, and classic is like Gupta was considered as, in India. In fact, Gupta was considered as one of the is time period when we have zenith of development, in every domain of life, polity, culture, economy, and everything. Simply, when you so you have certain schema, you have certain structures through which you try to construct the classical time period. uh, and for the British, it was, or the colonialists, it was easier device to impose, like what Colling would say, history is also reenactment of ideas. So this device, through this device, they were trying to legitimize their presence, and they were saying, okay, so look at the earlier period where classical system, or the structure, the state structure existed. So it's nothing, I mean, they were trying to legitimize themselves. Priya Satya has recently uh, written a very interesting work, very interesting book, uh, uh, and this work is called Time's Monster. It has been recently published, where Priya Satya's argument is that if you look at British colonialism, why British were, became very successful in conquering the Asia and Africa, and the whole large part of the world, because they used history as a tool. History was used as a tool, and history was largely a moralizing project. I mean, they were using as a moralizing weapons, in fact. And the whole idea of, whether it were Benthamites or the thinkers of Enlightenment thinkers, they were actually using this as a moral a knowledge system, and through using the history, they actually conquered the land. And he has a very long, in fact, whole book is revolves around the whole argument, whole idea of how history as an epistemic tool was used. And so now these are the things. Now, coming back to the third point, which I'd like to, next point would be like, if you look at why ancient India is relevant, so we have, for example, whole range of modernity. 1908, Gandhi wrote a text called Hind Swaraj. And if you look at Hind Swaraj, Gandhi questioned the whole idea of modernity. We have drawn a simple boundary of modern, primitive, the barbaric, the civilized. All such boundaries are very artificial and has been purposefully constructed. So is the modern and pre-modern, kind of. So, for example, we have a very, we think that, the history only, when we write history, we said, okay, if we have the archival materials, then we can write a history. But then this notion has been very widely challenged, and the whole new history writings emerged in India called subaltern history writings. Now, taking the similar vein, what I want to say, that look at the present context of development. What we call development has been largely challenged and largely been questioned. For example, the idea of modernity, idea of technological rationality, technological modernity, that if you bring the technology, every problem will be resolved, but it has created whole range of problems. If Enlightenment was so much, powerful in terms of welcoming, bringing new thinkings, rational ideas, and all, then why the two World War took place in Europe? One. Second, if you look at the environmental destructions, which have been, now we are all certainly concerned about environmental issues. So again, this is not only the question of the whole idea of modern being modern. So being rational or being modern is, sort of, now we are challenging. Thirdly, if you look at, deeper down to this environmental issues. Now, I'm not saying that in primitive time or in ancient India, environmental destruction could not took place. Of course, it was done. But look at the modern, the capitalist, mode of production, and how the industrialization, we can just simply think about the pre-industrialization, after industrialization, how much world has been destructed. Now Hindu Swaraj brings these issues very effectively. And Gandhi says, if this is notion of modernity, I refuse to accept, the idea of modern or modernity. So what we can learn from the traditions, that uh, one has to live a very sustainable life. A question of sustainability is now coming up in a larger discourse. But how primitive thinking or primitive life is, I'm not saying that primitive life or is completely, I mean, progress is not important. Progress is of course important, but at what cost? That is also something which we need to learn, and we need to think about it. So the second thing is, we have India is a very diverse society, diverse in terms of linguistic diversity, in terms of ethnic diversity, in terms of geographical diversity and all. So then the question of how past comes in addressing all this, particularly the ancient past, has some connection with the present, present problems, and the challenges which are facing, is something very important to think of. So for example, if you look at the idea of, in fact, caste. So if we don't know about genealogy of caste, or how caste function in past and how caste is functioning in present, we cannot understand the history of caste. And it has a kind of fashion to refuse the caste. But if you look at the political structure of modern day democracy, it is all based on the caste kind of things. I mean, like the way elections are being um, mm, um, fought, and people are representing the electoral politics. It has a deep root in this caste structure. So caste, whether caste was invented by the colonial authority through census and all, or caste has been existed right from the beginning, could be a good questions to answer. And and in order to answer, in order to find those answers, we need to look at the past. Sometime we have, and we have to obviously, when we say the history has job to legitimize, of course it legitimizes, but also it delegitimizes the things. I just give you one example. When Art Samaj movement was started by Dayanand Saraswati, Dayanand has very clear perspective on social values, social norms, and other things. And traditionalist Brahminical priest and Orthodox, in fact, Brahmins were opposing his idea, because he was saying that in Vedas these kind of things are not there. Now, there is a very interesting instance, and this is very interesting example one can think of. Uh, Once there was a fight between Arya Shamaji and the traditional believer of uh, ancient traditions and rituals. So Arya Shamaji were saying that there's no need to perform the rituals, Shraddha, death rituals. On the other hand, some of the Brahmins were, saying no, it is very important, and there are Purans which, explicitly talks about that dead bodies. I mean, your ancestor comes to eat the food. So death. I mean, the feast is very important. Offering of Shraddha rituals are very important, and there are fight between these two groups. Of Obviously, after pamphlets were written, and they actually started debating with each other. Finally, this issues were this was sent to Max Muller, and that it's very interesting, incident. Max Muller at that time, he was obviously expert in Vedas at that time, and so Max Muller says no. I mean, in every society, Max Muller wrote a long answer, and he says that look. I mean, in every society, this is kind of offering. So it's not very exclusive to the Brahminical society that people are offering Shraddha rituals or performing Shraddha rituals. Believing in this kind of ancestral rituals is something not very exclusive to the Brahminical structure. It is fine. It could be found in many other societies. And finally, Arya Samaji felt it that they have won the battle, and so now, so what I'm trying to say that how traditions, how the in fact it happened with Rajaram Mohan Rai also, that Brahm Samaj was attacked by the Orthodox Brahmins, and this Sati Pratha was there in textual. It has been mentioned in the texts and traditions, and the same Rajaram Mohan was killing the things from different texts and saying no, this has not been. It's a very it has been very much later that this system has been. So history has bought this role, legitimizing and delegitimizing. So there are issues. I mean, we are now. So can I finish and then we'll answer? so 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 what we can learn from history? I mean, there is an issue of, for example, the issue of right. Recently we are debating over the genetics and the ethnicity, and the whole Aryan debate. The ghost of Aryans are again coming and coming. So and the way history is trying to be, I mean, like Marxists always avoided. I mean, they said that this Aryan colonial, Wheeler believed that Aryan invasion took place. It was followed by the Marxist historians, but then it was rejected by the people, nationalists kind of, or the way so many historians and revisionists also believe that this whole Aryan debate is all construct. In fact, it's a very artificial construct. It's a linguistic has nothing to do with archaeology. Linguistic is a study of language, and it has nothing to do with archaeology. On the basis of certain injunctions, the certain linguistic terms, it is simply a very teleological explanation that one is saying that Aryan invasion took place. The whole 100 years of Indian history writing has been, obsessed with this question of Aryans, whether Aryan, comes from this side or that side. Even the nationalists, also sort of trapped in this whole. They also face the same kind of problem. Actually, they also indulge in the same discussions. In Bal Gangadhar Tilak, in fact, at that time, he went on to say that the Arctic areas from where the Aryan emerged. So the question is, if we believe on the, simply the genetics cannot resolve, or the molecular genetics cannot offer a very simple answer of ethnicity, that this ethnicity came from here, and this ethnic tribe came from here to there. All such, I mean, science has its own limitations. Science could be used in a better way, in a judicious way, but it doesn't mean it offers the whole history. I mean, it certainly supports historical explanation. It can, we can rely upon them, but the whole idea of saying that this has created a pseudoscience kind of thing, that uh, it is similar to what British colonialists believe, that everything is there in their own epistemic tradition, their own knowledge system. So every society has produced their own way of own production of knowledge, whether historical knowledge, philosophical knowledge, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say, that we need to revisit many issues to understand history. And history is something, it's not, we have uh, imperial history writing, we have nationalist history writing, we have colonialist history writing, we have post-colonialist history writings. Each and every schools and sections and branches have their own way of looking at history. So we need to be very careful. We need to be not judgmental. And as E.H. Carr says, history is not dialogue between past and present. It is also a dialogue between historians and historians. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was very informative, especially for the beginners like those students who are in first year. And we have some questions from our listeners. So for that, I would like to invite Mr. Ayush.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Shalendra. Thank you very much, sir. It was really a very insightful and very well explained talk. I'm sure all the participants here must have learned a lot from this. I would like to emphasize on a number of points that sir made in this session. Sir started with the problem of periodization, where we have basically divided history into ancient, medieval, and modern. Sir suggested that this is a very subjective thing because as time itself is very subjective, so we cannot simply divide it into three phases of time, and it is much more than that. Then Sir talked about debates between the Orientalists and the colonial historians, and how the nationalist historians are try to refute the claims made by the colonial historians, where the national historians suggest that the Britishers used history as a tool to conquer India, and it was really very effective in that they were very effective in conquering Africa and India. Then Sir talked about the relevance of ancient India, citing Hind Swaraj written by Mahatma Gandhi in 1908, where Mahatma Gandhi said that if modernization means inviting evils like industrial revolution, he would rather be ancient rather than being modern. Then Sir talked about the diversity of India, where there are so many castes and there are so many different religions of India that we have to go back to ancient India to understand how they generated, so that we can understand them better in the modern society. Sir also gave examples between conflicts between Arya Samaj and the Brahmins of that time, and also of Brahmo Samaj and the Brahmins of that time, of how history played an important role in resolving some of those conflicts, but not fully. Then, lastly, Sir made this point that we need to revisit many issues in history writing, so without being judgmental, without taking sides, we need to revisit those issues so that there can be a better understanding of history for our modern times. So now we'll take some questions. Uh, I'll ask them so they can directly ask the questions to you. We'll start with Shiva Tiwari. If you're here, you can ask your question. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you're
Yes.
right.
Ask your question.
So my question is, how did ancient India influence us today?
Okay. So, uh, I mean, there are many ways through which we connect with our past. I mean, the tradition and past. I mean, these two terms could be used in a very interchangeable way. So, for instance, our entire, set of cultural things which we have carried, and there are certain ruptures also. There is discontinuity and continuity both in terms of our, living style. I just give you one example. You have the swastika symbols. When you go to buy something new things, and then you go to buy a car, and then you make, engrave the swastika symbol. Now, it has nothing to do with any religion, I'm telling you. Right from the Harappan civilization, we have followed this. I mean, we have the earliest evidence of swastika from there. So, and it's one tiny example I'm giving you. There are many ways in which the past has a very pervasive influence over our present life, and this could be found. This could be easily discerned in our living traditions. So, the way we live, the way we speak, the way we you know, continuing our traditions. So in a, multiple ways, our ancient past has influenced us and continuously influencing us. So there are innumerable examples. One can, just get it from uh, own observations. If you theoretically try to explain, it would be very, it's a, obviously it could be a long discussion. So what I'm trying to say that Eric Hobsbawm has said that, uh, invention of traditions. So tradition is not something which has, shrunk into time. It is, continuously with us, and tradition invent itself. Tradition is being invented by others also.
Next is Saurav Singh. I think he left. Sir, his question was, sir, how do you define rewriting history? Is something like this even possible to do so?
Yes, very interesting question. Uh, I think rewriting is very important, and it has been done all through the. You have very interesting, look at the where the government changes, the history writing definitely get affected. So you have this, NCRT that was, formulated, that was established as institutions, as a, some central body to look after, textbook writings. uh, so I think the kind of writing which existed in 60s and 70s, the history where Ramila Thapar and others, was changed over the period of time. And then, of course, it was changed in 2005. Again, it has been changed. What is what does it what does the change signify? Change signify the fact that we need to look at many facts which has not been, either it has been overlooked or has been marginalized. For instance, look at the history of environment, look at the history of gender, look at the history of marginal, entities, caste and others, those who have been not represented in history, but their history are emerging as a major sort of voice. So history has many voices, and it is not that one has to look at, look at the Iranian history or look at the colonial history where all the dynasty people were obsessed with the dynasty and all. Now people are looking at the environment, looking at gender, looking at, the social history in a very uh, extensive way. So I think rewriting is always, and we need to decolonize also. The decolonization is, a very larger project. We need to rethink about the time period. We need to rethink about things which has been imposed upon us. Like, look at the bureaucratic, the colonial dominations on history. So history needs to be decolonized first, and the process of decolonizations can only be done when we develop the actual sense of past. There are many ways through which we can rewrite the history, and rewriting is, of course, rewriting doesn't mean that we need to do the we need to reject the history. Of course, we need to uh, uh, we need to respect the sanctity of past, and past is a very diverse past. Right? Past is not something. Past has not to be seen in a very exclusive way. Like, past has to be seen in a very inclusive way. So because we have the history which has a long traditions. I give you one example. Harappan civilization has been largely discarded. The exploration of Harappan civilization, conservation and preservation of Harappan site has been largely discarded in Pakistan. Pakistan is, has not paid attention on the Harappan sites. Now they are starting doing so. So history is not to be seen in the national boundary. Sometimes this history has not to be seen in a very confined geographical sense. Sometimes we have very shared sense of past. So India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and we all have very shared history. One cannot deny that Pakistan has also this ancient Indian history, and they have to look at the ancient history of India. I mean, again, this is shared history, so it's not exclusive. So we cannot say that only Pakistan has modern history or medieval history. Are you getting my point? Similarly,
Yes,
it
sir.
applied to India. It applied to Bangladesh. Bangladesh, a lot of Buddhist sites are there. They are on the brink of destructions. Nobody cares about those sites. Only UNESCO has emerged as one custodian of heritage sites. They are taken care of, but most of the sites are on the brink of destruction. So history has to be seen a larger way, in the larger sense, in not a very small geographical or parochial confinement.
So next we have Ajay Gupta.
Okay, so thank you, sir, and it was really indeed a very informative lecture that you have given today. Sir, you have talked about the Orientalism, sir, like how they have perceived the East and how the Western writers have made a kind of critique and how they have written an account of East on imagined realities. So while going through that, I got to know that the Orientalism has the two stream, that is the positive and the romantic. Sir, I believe it is my perception that positive stream is not that much to be taken care of because it is too much critical about the East. But do you think, sir, romantic stream of Orientalism has some degree of legitimacy in that? Can we believe that, or can we say yes to that particular stream? My questions.
Okay, very good question. Very nice question. Now, so yes, there are not one voice of Orientalism. There are many voices. Um, so Orientalists, particularly, like if you look at the German romantist, like Schlegel and all those who had this idea of Orient in their mind, and they were quite romanticized. Uh, in fact, I just gave you one example of William Jones, when he finished this text of Sakuntala. He wrote this later to his friend, and he says that, look, he wrote it to Gibbon. In fact, Gibbon was a great historian who wrote this Rise and Decline of Roman Empire. So and both represent the post enlightenment. So he said, look, I have read this text and it's such interesting. Uh, so the production of knowledge was not a very in and process. The knowledge were produced. I mean, if you look at the Orientalists, it was not Orientalist. Before Orientalist, the missionaries were already, started reading texts, translating texts. So why they were doing so? They were doing because they had this proselytizing Christian. The job was, their purpose was to proselytize Christianity. Spread the Christianity. Uh, uh, and that this was, but when the William Jones came, or the other people came to India, the company has a very certain missions. Why they choose first to translate the Manu Smriti or the other text? Because law, they wanted to know about the laws, the rule of law, how the people have been governed. And so the translation was not mere very neutral translation. It was a kind of a very strategically devised, and they had a very purpose of doing so. They produced the knowledge, and knowledge is not, it is not a neutral act. Knowledge is always purposeful. Why you are generating, why you are collecting. I'm giving one example. Linguistic Survey of India. Linguistic Survey was done by Grierson. In 1811, South India was surveyed by Colin Mackenzie by East India. He was surveyor appointed by East India Company. Similarly, Francis Buchanan Hamilton was appointed as a surveyor in the part of India like Bihar, Bengal, and others. North India. Look at their monumental surveys. Each and every details will found. Google will not tell you the kind of information these two people gathered from North and South. It's monumental, it's massive. Why they were, why this documentation were done. In a village, how many houses are built of mud, how many houses are, what kind of this tradition they followed, what kind of, each and every details you have in it's very encyclopedic information. And information has a purpose, and purpose was to legitimize the presence of British. So this was not done in a very neutral way, and people have started questioning those knowledge which were, produced, collected. I mean, look at the Asiatic Society of Bengal. Indians were not allowed to be members of Asiatic Society in early days. They were not considered as someone who was civilized, educated, and in capacity to join the Asiatic Society. So you have the tone of racism in their statement. You have. I'm not saying that the knowledge which they produce are not beneficial for us. Certainly they are, but then every knowledge, every knowledge, set of knowledge has to be seen in a very broader context. And it is our job, being student of history, it's our job to decode the purpose, why it was produced, from where it was produced. In Oxford, there is a statue of William Jones. It has been, erected in Oxford, and he is being surrounded by. He has been shown as surrounded by the priest. So he's sitting on the chair, and all the Indian native priests are sitting, in down. So the stage structure, the iconography also tells us the hierarchy of system, the hierarchy of power, and one can easily discern. So when we look at these people, when we look at the their ideas, we have to be very careful, to understand the context in which knowledge is being produced, knowledge is being created. I hope that I've answered your
Yes,
question.
yes, it was a really nice answer. As there's a limitation of time, we'll move ahead. So
Yeah.
now over to Shalendra.
Thank you, Mr. Ayush. Thank you so much. And thank you, sir, as well. I'm very sure of the fact that everyone have got various insights from this intellectual and scholarly talk. And in future also, we wish be looking forward this kind of informative sessions with you. Thank you so much, sir, once again. Now at the end, for conclusion, I would like to invite Dr. Manish Karamwar, sir, to finally conclude this session and to present vote of thanks. Dr. Manish Karamwar sir is a convener, and also he's convener of GSTS and GCC, which are two great initiatives from Sakshya, which is the History Society. So please come and give the concluding remarks.
Okay, Mr. Salendra, thank you very much. And on the behalf of Department of History, Samuel College Evening, I, Dr. Manish Karmar, with my colleagues, Dr. Pramod Kumar, Dr. D.N. Singh, and two young colleagues, Dr. Seema and Dr. Ajay. It's indeed my privilege that I'm having such a galaxy of colleagues and my students here to listen to you, Dr. Diwakar, and Dr. Diwakar, with you. We have some interesting and scholars also and teachers also, like Professor S.M. Jha sir, Dr. Narottam Beneath, Dr. Ranjan, Dr. Prem, Dr. Nisansam. Thank you very much for here, and it's indeed my pleasure to conclude this session. So, range of ideas. Oh my God! And the questions and the answers. So such a colossus experience and expertise of Dr. Diwakar gives us immense pleasure. Ray of index from Marx, Max Muller, James Mill, Chase Mill, Edward Said, Jeff Logart, Priya Satia, and the way you inculcated and you crafted your whole discussion, it's really wonderful. The questions are also informative. And most importantly, we started this session, and this not only start, it's not only the end of this session. We are going to start a new horizon for our students. We are going to invite so many scholars from different from different colleges, and it's our like process of Samuel Evening College. We call every time from since 2009 different scholars from the different colleges to enhance our students' skill and give their impetus, give their ideas about about the medieval, about the modern, about the ancient Indian history. So one of my students started with the Collingwood, and Dr. Diwakar mentioned about the EHCAR and what is history. So I end with all these discussions with the Arthur Marwick. What is history? So he told about that history is not only production of knowledge, that it's not only the production of knowledge, it's a communication of knowledge, and not only communication of knowledge, it's a teaching of the knowledge. So if you whole accumulate E.H. Carr, Collingwood, and Arthur Marwick, I suppose as a teacher we are going to give our student to broader idea about the what is history. So well done, and you have just concluded your remarks in the three different arena. How chronology is very problematic, idea of history writing, and why ancient India is relevant. And just like question, can historian use the Vedas? Just like these questions, and how Vedic are our religious tradition. These are other questions which are very pertinent. Just Ajay asked this question about the Orientalism and the two ways of Orientalism, and the discussion is going on with these topics, and the range of ideas we can formulate and we get from your lecture, Dr. Diwakar. It's really fantastic, and because I'm a modern Indian student, so the first book I have read in my graduation, graduation, A Passage to India by E.M. Foster. So your whole idea inculcated, and you have incorporated the passage to India like E.M. Foster and to the Raghavan Iyers. How the Britishers came to India and constructed the British idea into India. So fabulous, and thank you very much. And it is honored to vote of thanks of this occasion on the behalf of again Samuel College Evening, Sakshya, GSTS. I, Dr. Manish Kumar, express my gratitude towards my senior colleague, towards my classmates and the juniors who are here, and my students. And really, it's a thought-provoking initiative with through this stage, and we are grateful again to Dr. Diwakar for in-depth insight of the importance of ancient India in the modern times. These are the very pertinent question, and with those words, I take you towards the closure of this session. Thank you very much to each one of you for this successful deliberation, my all of his students, and students not for in this session, students not from only Delhi University. Some of the students are connected with the Jahanabad also, because our college is just signed a MOU in SNS College Jahanabad. So thank you to listening, and so it's a really pleasure, Diwakar, to listen you. Thank you very much. So officially we are going to end this seminar. Thank you all for coming, and this is only initiation. Much more ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Manish sir, for inviting, and for it's such a kind of privilege to be part of this program. And thank you everyone for asking very good question, and thanks so much for all my in fact senior and some colleagues as well.
Batchmates,
So
huh? So
yes.
now it's